Joining me now for more on this, independent political analyst Aidan Smith, who joins us from Washington, DC. How's this going down there? How would you describe Washington, a political, of course, area, and all the talk there at the moment?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, this is nothing less than an absolutely extraordinarily terrible incident is, there's really no words. We haven't seen anything like this against a presidential candidate, I believe, of any major party since Robert F. Kennedy in 1968. And obviously, in terms of incumbent presidents, since the attempt on Reagan's life, I believe, in the early 1980s. I think that everyone is extremely glad that nothing ended up happening, not least of the actual human impact, but also just what it would actually have entailed, likelihood in terms of violence that could have followed. I think that, it's such a tumultuous 24 hours. I think that a lot of the talk yesterday was really about its impact on the presidential election in terms of whether this would benefit the Republicans in terms of garnering sympathy votes versus how it would impact Biden's campaign. I think today it's switched mainly to consideration of how it might affect Biden's primary campaign. This has been obviously come after significant talk among top Democrats of wanting to put Harris or, another nominee in the driver's seat. This is obviously something that has quieted it down. And I think that that's kind of, at this point, the main thing that people think is going to have the biggest single political impact on.
Yeah, that particular element, look, that will get picked up again at some point, I'm sure, but that's completely on the back burner, obviously. There was tragedy out of this with a 50-year-old father diving across and saving his daughter's life in all likelihood, and sadly he's died, others in critical but stable conditions. But yes, Donald Trump survives, and that will, you'd hope, avoid the sort of worst type of escalation, I suppose. The other thing that's going to be focused on is the shooter. Now, there's two sort of different bits of evidence, one that he'd once donated to a progressive Democratic campaign, and the other that he was a registered Republican voter, which doesn't mean he voted Republican, we should stress, but that's going to be the next element, isn't it? Sifting through a motive as to whether or not that leads one side, in particular the Republicans, to ramp up anger.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that's something, especially, in an international audience, when we think of American party registration, just registering as a Republican, it's definitely not indicative of one's general election voting in the same way that party membership, and especially, we'd call them strong party systems with official formal national party memberships, especially in parliamentary democracies, very different than just ticking off a box in one's home state. It's, kind of famous, especially in the South. A lot of longtime registered Democrats have ended up voting Republican consistently in the last 10, 20 years. I think in this, and I'm not entirely familiar with, aside from the news of both, as you mentioned, the party registration and the details about past donations and potential support for progressive candidates. My initial hunch, honestly, and this is just thinking of the reality of gun violence in America and also the reality of political violence. My initial hunch, honestly, yesterday is that it could easily be someone who has an ideal, who, let's be honest, is probably deeply disturbed. I'm not going to speculate on someone's actual psychological condition, but that is kind of the profile of most people who would commit these crimes. And I think the significance of that is it could be someone whose beliefs are just a weird conspiracy theorist. It could very well be someone who thinks that, is a flat earther, thinks Trump is a NASA shill. That I think, if I'm just speculating, that I could easily see it being a really weird idiosyncratic mix of beliefs, as opposed to, someone who firmly opposed Trump from the left or someone from the right who thought Trump was too moderate. I think that's generally the psychological profile, but there are exceptions in terms of people who are really rigidly ideological.
Yeah, that part will, of course, I suppose, dictate part of the narrative. I wonder how much it might change Donald Trump. Look, that image of him fist in the air is one that will be seen for hundreds of years, I suspect, and dominate this campaign. But given what seems to be this catastrophic security failure, all these eyewitnesses saying they'd seen this man crawling along the roof only 150 metres away, I mean, I'd be thinking twice about going out and appearing at rallies as normal.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's honestly something, and it's kind of probably because I'm in DC and you talk to people who think about these things. But I've heard a long time, both people who are on the left and also some people I know who are conservative. I've had conversations about it. The Secret Service, which is probably the most famous in the world among government, government employed protection for a national head of state. It's actually unclear, especially in the last 20 years, how much of what Secret Service does is just what we'd call security theater stuff, like especially in the War on Terror era, stuff that looks like really strong guardrails against acts of terror or violence being committed, but is really just stuff that is not intentionally performative per se. It's stuff that is probably for good measures intention, but it's unclear as to how much they actually, we have the image in America of Secret Service agents being, absolutely rigid, not wanting an inch to be uncovered in terms of stuff. Logistically, it does not seem, and I've heard this for a while from people speculating that in reality, and I think a lot of it might actually have to do with budget appropriations, that there's just massive limits in terms of what the Secret Service is actually capable of, siphoning off major portions of an area in which a candidate is speaking. But I think, that could absolutely be the subject of congressional hearings in upcoming months.
Yeah, even just afterwards. I mean, he's a big man, and he wanted to project that image, and he did, but they couldn't even cover him up. Which again, do you need the people around him being 6'4", 6'5"? Some basic logistics, perhaps. Anyway, not my area of expertise. Aidan Smith, appreciate your time there. I know it's late in Washington, D.C. We'll talk again during this long election campaign. Thank you.